theyeshiva.net.
One of the great figures of the Middle Ages in the Jewish world was a man named Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Asher. Rabbi Yaakov, or Jacob, the son of Asher, who's also known as the Baal Haturim. He was born in Germany in the year 1269, or approximately the year 1269. Later moved to Spain, where he passed away on the 12th day of Tammuz, 1343. He's often referred to as the Baal Haturim, which means the master of the rows. Tur is a row. The Torah in Exodus and Parshas Tazria speaks about the breastplate, the choshen mishpat of the high priest, which had within it fixed a stone for each of the tribes, and there were arba turim. There were 4 rows of stones embedded, etched into the breastplate of the high priest. Rabbeinu Yaakov, of the 13th century, Germany and Spain, authored his main work, which is known as Arba Turim, the 4 rows, named after the 4 rows of stones in the breastplate of the high priest. It basically was a work that divided all of contemporary Jewish law into 4 rows, 4 turim, 4 sections: Oire Chaim, Yoredeya, Even Ha'ezer, and Choshen Mishpat. And it's one of the most fundamental works of Jewish law, one of the most foundational works of halacha that is studied till today. He was the 3rd son of Rabbeinu Asher, who's known as the Rosh. Rabbeinu Asher, the Rosh, this was his father, who was one of the greatest rabbis and sages of his time, and his 3rd son was Rabbeinu Yaakov, the Baal Haturim. This 13th century sage, Rabbeinu Yaakov, wrote another commentary, another work on the Chumash, which is also known as Baal Haturim, and printed in many of the Chumashim, written by the same person who wrote the Tur, also wrote a commentary on Chumash called Baal Haturim. And basically, the genre of this commentary, Baal Haturim, is one that reveals many of the numerical hints and allusions which are hidden in the words of the Tanach, of the Chumash, including various intimations that are embedded in these words, whether it's numerology, whether it's acrostics, whether it's formations of letters, whether it's word patterns in the Chumash. And he shows and demonstrates the unique messages that are hidden away, tucked away in a verse, in a word throughout the Chumash. One of the fascinating premises of the Baal Haturim is that whenever the Tanach uses 2 words in different situations that are similar, even if it's 4 words employed in 4 distinct places, completely disconnected from each other, but the fact that the Tanach chooses to employ the same term means that there is a connection. And to appreciate the full depth of the word in one location, you have to be able to look for the same word in every other location in Tanakh, which will add a certain meaning or flavor or depth into this word. And he goes ahead and illustrates this. In every single portion of the Torah, the Baal Haturim chooses words that show up in other places, whether in Chumash or in the Tanakh. And then he demonstrates the hidden connections and correlations between them, showing how with each time the word is used, we gain insight into all of the sources employing the term. This is fascinating because We have nothing even close to this in any other literature. Take English literature, for example. Imagine a literary scholar suggesting that each time Dickens or Hemingway used the word exhausted in any of their works, we have to search for an inner link. That literary scholar would be soon deemed as not only unscholarly, but quite strange. We would dismiss this person as an illiterate fool who knows nothing about literature. Not so, lahavdil, with the Tanach, a divine blueprint for humanity. The fact that a particular term was chosen in many different places, completely disconnected. Not the same portion, not the same book, not the same theme, not the same story, but the fact that the same term was chosen is precise and meaningful and contributes to the picture and to the full understanding. One of his insights in this, one such insight in quite a fascinating example is found this week in the Torah portion of Tazria. As you know, the portion of Tazria is dedicated for the most part to the various skin discolorations which may afflict the Metzora, which we can loosely translate as the leper. And the Torah states in Parshas Tazria, and I'll quote the verse, it's in chapter 13, Perek Yud Gimel. The Torah says, V'hatzorua asher boi hanega. The person who has the skin discoloration, the leprosy, the nega, b'gadav yiyu frumim. His garments shall be torn, v'roisha yiyeh farua. And his head, roisha, shall be farua, which means unshorn. He does not cut his hair. Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, the Baal Haturim, attracts our attention to one word, v'roisha, and his head shall be farua, it shall be grown, unshorn, v'roisha. And he says, Now this is the 13th century, so you don't have the concordancia, and you don't have Google. He says, where else do we have the word v'roisha? V'roisha means his head. So the Baal Haturim says, Daled. In Tanach you will find 4 times the word roisha used, his head. Dain here, Parshas Tazria here. And then he says, let's go back. The first time it's used is in Parshas Noach, in the beginning of Genesis. The people of Babylonia are building a tower. And they say, let us build a tower, v'roishai b'shamayim. Its head should reach the heavens. So that is already twice. One in Parshas Tazria, and then we go back to Parshas Noach, Migdal v'roishai b'shamayim, let us build a tower with its head, its top reaching the heavens. When is the next time the word v'roishai is used? Says the Baal Haturim, a few portions later, the dream of Yaakov Avinu, Parshas Vayetze. Vayachloim, he has a dream, v'hinei, sula mutzav arza. There's a ladder standing on the ground, v'roishai. And its head, meaning the top of the ladder, magia hashamayma, reaches heaven. Finally, there's a 4th time that the word v'roishai is used. In addition to Tazria, Noach, and Vayetze. Tazria is here the leper. Noach, the Tower of Babel, and Vayetze, the ladder of Yaakov. And that's in the book of Job. The book of Eov, chapter 20. Eov there, in that chapter, the Tanach describes, and I'll quote the words and translate its intense Hebrew prose. Hazois yadata mini admini sim adam alayaretz. Do you know this from time immemorial, since the first human being was placed on earth? Kirinanas Rishayim Mikarev V'simchas Choneif Adei Rega. The triumph of the wicked is always short-lived, and the joy of flatterers is but a moment. Imiyala lashamayim siyoi v'roishoi la'ov yagia. If his glory ascends to heaven and his head reaches the clouds, kigeleloi lanetzach yoivid royav yoimru ayoi. Like his dung, he perishes forever, and those who have seen him will say, where is he? Like a dream, he will fly away and they will not find him. He will wander away like a vision of the night. The eye that glimpsed him will do so no more, and his place will see him no longer. What Job is describing is the fate of people who dedicate their lives either to destruction or to flattery, to something that is completely inauthentic. He says people who dedicate their life to short-lived glory and validation. So he says for a brief moment, his glory ascends to heaven. His head reaches the clouds. By the way, the expression, her head is in the clouds, or his head is in the clouds, people don't know it's a biblical expression. It comes from this verse in Eov. This is the fourth V'roishai. His head reaches the clouds. Basically, you think you're living in the clouds. You think you're on top of the world. But ultimately, sooner or later, it's a fleeting dream, and people wonder, where has all of this gone to? Because the investment was in a psychological panzai scheme. Says the Baal Haturim, 4 V'roishos in Tanach. 1, Genesis, the Tower of Babel. They want it to reach heaven. Number 2, the ladder of Yaakov reaches heaven. Indeed reaches heaven. And the angels are going up and down. Number 3, Leviticus, Tazria, his head, the head of the leper, shall be unshorn. And number 4, the book of Job, V'roishoi la'ov yagia. His head in his mind reaches the clouds. Says the Baal Haturim, all these 4 terms are connected. And they provide commentary for each other. Which means the way we study Tanach is on many different layers. We study a verse and it's self-contained. We study a chapter and it's self-contained. But there's another layer in which we check for the term. And that gives another layer of meaning or another layer of depth, which we do have not known from the self-contained word. We have to look at the same word in all the places of the Tanakh, because in the expression of the Chazal in Tosefta Sanhedrin, Kol HaTorah Inyan Echad. In many ways, all of Torah is basically one theme, even if it manifests in so many diverse themes. On an underlying level, it's one theme, or as the Rekha Gaon once said, from the Beis of Bereshis till the Lamed of Yisrael, the beginning of Chumash and end of Chumash, he said, is one long word. The Beis of Bereshis till the Lamed of Yisrael is one long word on another level, of course. Or the Ramban writes in the introduction to Chumash, Kol HaTorah Kula Hishmoisav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The whole Torah is really God's names if you know how to configure the words. So there's different readings, different layers, and all are authentic. How do we decipher this brief commentary of the Baal Haturim? What are the connections of these 4 roishos? What in the world is the connection between the Tower of Babel, the ladder of Yaakov Avinu, the head of the person who's a leper, who becomes impure as a result of the leprosy, and the head who has reached the clouds, the flatterer, the choynef, the machnef, who Job describes? When the Torah introduces the concept of leprosy, and I said before it's a loose translation because the symptoms of leprosy today are not exactly a reflection of the symptoms of leprosy described in Chumash. We use the word because they both represent a certain skin disease, but it's not exactly an accurate translation because the symptoms of Chumash were unique symptoms. the way the Torah describes in the beginning of Tazria is Adam kiyeh ba'or b'saroi se'es oy sapachas oy baheres. 3 terms to describe the symptoms: se'es, sapachas, and baheres, which all represent different shades of skin, of the skin disconfiguration, but all have a common denominator, and that is a white patch suddenly develops on one's skin. A white patch, not its ordinary color, but there are different shades of white. One is called baheres. Baheres is the sharpest form of white, which the Mishnah Negayim describes as snow. There is a lesser level, which is known as fleece, tzemer, white wool, which is also quite white, but it's not quite the whiteness of snow. There is the whiteness of krum beitza, the membrane, the shell of the egg, also of white. So the Torah uses different terms to describe various shades of white that our sages describe at length when they discuss the halachos of Negayim and their practical applications. But the Torah uses 3 terms: se'es, sapachas, and baheres. Chazal explain that se'es and baheres represent 2 shades of white. Sapachas, which means an accompaniment, an adhesion, is an outgrowth of each of the 2. That's why we have an expression, maris hanagayim shtayim shein arba. There are 2 types of skin discolorations that make leprosy, and they branch off into 4, because each one, the baheres has a sapachas, which means an accompaniment, a copy of a lower quality, and the se'es also has a sapachas, a copy. Altogether are 4, but the Torah uses these 3 terms: se'es, sapachas, and baheres. But we know our sages felt, and there's a whole discussion on Gemara about this in Tractate Erkin, page 15, that the leprosy of the Torah was a symptom of moral disconfiguration rather than a simple medical condition, and their interpretation was based on the internal evidence of the Torah itself. Because when do we have the first case of tzaraat? We have it much before Miriam. Come on. You? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, just joking, it's fine. You're allowed to make mistakes. Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, when he's chosen to become the leader of the Jewish people, and Moshe proclaims about the Jewish people 4 words: Veheim lo ya'aminu li, they will not believe me, explaining and conveying his doubt about this people, their willingness to believe, to trust. And what happens afterwards? He is struck. He's told to put his hand in his bosom, takes out his hand. V'hine yadai mitzoras kasholeg. He suddenly looks at his hand, and it appears like snow. It has the look of snow. It's mitzoras kasholeg. Then, of course, Miriam, in Numbers in Baal Haturim, is struck by leprosy when she speaks against her brother Moshe. So Moshe is the first one struck when he speaks against the people. Miriam is struck when she speaks against Moshe. And that's why the Gemara says in Maseches Erkin that the word Mitzorah doesn't only mean leper. The word Mitzorah is a combination of 3 words. Moitzi Ra, which is Moitzi Shemra, somebody who spoke evilly, spoke negatively, destructively. Ra, somebody who says evil things about another person, which is basically a form of evil speech. And that's why they associated leprosy with a penalty for one's internal immoral behavior, particularly the sins of language. Moitzi Shemra, which is bad-mouthing somebody. Lashon Hara, which is evil speech, slander, and gossip, which they consider to be very serious, immoral behaviors, to the point that the Rambam, the great codifier Maimonides, in Hilchos Deis, in the Laws of Deis, says that Chazal say, based on the Gemara, our sages say, that there are 3 great cardinal sins of Gilui Arayos, Shvichas Damim, Avodah Zarah, idolatry, adultery, and bloodshed. And then he says, but lashon hara, evil speech, is shakul keneged kulan, it's bad as all three combined. And they said when somebody speaks evil speech, it's kilu kafar be'ikr, like he denies God. And it kills, katal tisay, it kills three people, the one who says it, the one who accepts it, the one about whom it's said, as the Rambam puts it in Hilchas Deis, Perik Zion, chapter 7, based on the discussion of Gemara and Erkin and various midrashim. The truth is, if you look at it from a historical point of view, people often fail to realize the power of words. God, we're told, created the world through words. Ba'asara ma'amoros nivra ha'olam. The world was created through 10 utterances. When you look in Bereshis, the world is described as a verbal articulation of the divine. Vayomer Elokim, Hashem said. Through 10 utterances, he created the world. Why is that so important to understand, that the world was created through words? Because it means that words constitute the very stuff and the very chemistry of the universe. That means through words, I create the world, but it also means through words, I can undo the world. Through words, I can build a life, and through words, I can destroy a life. Very often, one looks at words as intangible, insignificant, inconsequential. What are words? I didn't do anything. There was no concrete action. Nothing happened in the tangible world. I just said a few words. But from a Jewish perspective, the very world is a word. In other words, words are the underlying DNA of creation. And I guess the word DNA just came to me, but DNA is understood as a formation of letters, as a program code. So when they discovered DNA, we really realized that the underlying organism of every organism in our world, in our universe, is basically so-called letters, so-called oisios. Even though it's a different type of letter, it just employs the term of letter, but it's organized like really a computer code, like a program code. That's how DNA is organized, and that is the underlying source of life of every single organism. So words and letters in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, are so significant. God built the world through words, and we can build worlds with words, and heaven forbid, destroy worlds also with words. It's sad that often Jews throughout history failed to learn the lessons of previous generation, where evil talk about other people whom they disagreed with often had horrific consequences beyond even what they could imagine, and in a way that went completely out of control. You'll talk about what comes to mind, just an example is, in the 13th century, a bitter dispute broke out between devotees and critics of Maimonides. The Rambam, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, who lived in the 12th century, he was born in Spain, and then fled and ended up in Morocco and Fez, and then fled to the Holy Land, and then came to Egypt, where he passed away and is buried in Tiberias. He was one of the greatest Jewish minds of all time. He had tremendous devotees, to the point that the Jews of Yemen, during his lifetime, they would say in Kaddish, B'chayechein u'v'yoymechein u'v'chaye de Rabbana Moshe ben Maimon u'v'chaye chol Beis Yisrael. In the life of the Rambam, they said in the Kaddish, to that point was the dedication to the Rambam, but for others, he was considered a dangerous thinker, whose works, particularly his Sefer Hamada and his Moreh Nevuchim, his Guide to the Perplexed, from their perspective, contained ideas that were antithetical to Judaism, and whose influence could lead people to leave Yiddishkeit. There were ferocious exchanges, and as it is with Jews, it's usually with words. Words. Each side issued condemnations, excommunications against the other. There were pamphlets, and counter pamphlets, and you're talking about the 13th century. This is a century after the Rambam passed away. There were sermons and counter sermons, lectures and counter lectures. Spanish and French Jewry were torn apart by this controversy, to the point that there were Jews who burnt some of the works of the Rambam. Everybody sobered up, though, when they discovered that at some point the Christians in 1232, they burnt the books of the Rambam. They sobered up when they realized that in the 1200s, in the 1240s, the Christians in France burnt all the copies of the Talmud they could find. It was one of the greatest tragedies of the Middle Ages, because this is before the printing press. 1,000 years of work was lost. They had 24 wagons loaded with every manuscript of the Talmud that they could find in Paris and France, and it was all burnt. The fact that we still have it today is miraculous. What was discovered is that as a result of the internal Jewish struggle and fighting, that resulted ultimately in a fire going beyond what people imagine. A person lights a small fire, but it rages beyond control. They took advantage of the Jewish accusations of heresy against another Jew. If the Jews say it's heresy, certainly we can burn the books. They could take advantage of the split within Jewry to proceed with their own persecutions because of their own anti-Semitism and hatred of the Jewish people. Some of the worst persecutions of Jews were initiated either by Jews themselves who converted to Christianity, and they used that, or sometimes from the fighting and debates between the Jews themselves. This story happened quite a few times in Jewish history in one way or another. Jews who had somewhat of a more narrow vision thought that by delegitimizing, expressing venom and hate towards a person they disagreed with, it would be a way to save the Jewish world. What happened often was the exact opposite. Everybody lost, and in ways that they could not imagine. And so, for a people of history, it is sometimes bewildering of how people often fail to learn the lessons of history. Sometimes Jews felt that they couldn't win, and therefore they slandered their opponents to the official governments or the regime, thinking that will take care of it, but those authorities just manipulated the weakened situation for their own agendas, for their own benefits. It's true collectively, it's true historically, it's also true individually between families. If you look at any family that is split by feuds and arguments, not disagreements, Jewish families have disagreements, but feuds and fights and disputations and animosity and hatred, a huge part of it has to do with words. Words that sometimes look innocent. Conversations between sisters, between brothers, between a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law, between a parent and a child, between a nephew and an uncle, between a niece and a cousin. And 50 years later, 30 years later, 10 years later, sometimes the fighting is still there. And the Chazal understood that tzaraat was essentially a physical symptom of that inner malady, because they looked at the disconfiguration of the skin as a symptom of evil speech. And the point here was not just a mystical connection, but also a very tangible connection. Because when we use words to condemn others, we become disconfigured. There is a disconfiguration of the person. When your words are used to close rather than open minds, to divide rather than unite, to condemn rather than communicate, to destroy rather than to build, to denigrate rather than to elevate, when we use language as a weapon of destruction and of hatred, it disconfigures not only the person we're talking about, it disconfigures the one who is speaking it more than anybody else. So even when we read today Tazria Mitzayra, its messages seem so archaic because we don't have these symptoms today. Its message remains: linguistic violence is no less savage than physical violence. Linguistic oppression, abuse, mockery, denigration, words of negativity and hate are no less damaging. We all know children who suffered verbal abuse and emotional abuse are no less damaged than people who, God forbid, suffered physical abuse. Not to delegitimize the devastating nature of physical abuse, but sometimes you see people who are disintegrated. Nobody ever laid a finger on them, but the words, what they say, sticks and stones break my bones, right? But words don't harm, but that's not true. Words don't break bones, they break souls. They break hearts, and a person may have all their bones, but with a broken soul and a broken heart, the person has a very hard time to function. Words wound, insults injure, and evil speech destroys individuals, communities, families. Language is God's great gift to mankind. We are called medaber. Vayhi ha'adam lenefesh chaya, says the Targum, leruach memalala. How we are distinguished as humans is our faculty of speech. When you're given such a gift has to be used to heal, not to harm. But let's now travel from history and facts more to the world, what you may call Torah HaNefesh, or the world of psychology. Why do people gossip? What does it give us? I can understand the instinct to steal, to lie, to deceive, to cheat. What's behind the instinct to gossip? What does it do for a person? What does it give me? Here is where we will come to discover the deeper layer of the terms used for leprosy. 3 terms. Se'es, sapachas, baheret. They're not only descriptions of the disconfiguration of the skin, which becomes, which experiences a tzaraat, a leprosy. They are also, like all the words in the Torah, descriptions of the inner soul of leprosy, the inner soul of tzaraat. They explain to us 3 major motives, 3 major reasons, consciously or subconsciously, that moves a person to speak in a particular way, whether it's lashon hara, evil speech, or motzi shemra, bad-mouthing somebody. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's untrue. If it's untrue, it's called motzi shemra. If it's true, it's still called lashon hara. And for this, the Baal Haturim, Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, who lived in Germany and Spain in the 13th century, 700 years before the revolution of psychoanalysis, he gives us perspective. And the way he gives us perspective is by showing that the Torah uses the same term in 4 different situations. 1 here and 3 in other places. And when we look in each one of the places, we can have the deeper hidden perspective. What is behind this type of conversation? We have the Tower of Bavel, where they want a migdal v'roshei b'shamayim, the head is in heavens. We have the ladder of Yaakov, where the head reaches heaven. They don't want to, over there by the tower, they want it to reach heaven. And Yaakov, in a dream, actually has the ladder reach heaven. Now, cynically, you could say, well, it's a dream. Like the story with the holy Ruzhiner, B'Yisrael of Ruzhin, the Halakha Ruzhiner, when he was a child, he would always ask the questions that Rashi asks. And the teacher expected that if Rashi asks a question on the text, this young boy is going to ask the question. They came to study the story of Yaakov's dream, Jacob's dream. He dreams of a ladder standing on the ground, the top reaches heaven, and the angels are going up and going down. And of course, Rashi asks the question, first it should have said, going down and then going up, because the angels ostensibly are from heaven. So they come down and then they go up. Why does it say, Oilim v'yardim, going up and down? But the little boy, Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, or as he was called, Yisraelik at the time, was not asking the question. And the teacher was waiting and waiting and waiting, and then he finally says, "Nu," and the boy says, "What's the nu? What do you want?" He says, "Why don't you have a question on the verse?" He says, everything makes sense. He had a dream, there's a ladder, the angels are going up and the angels are going down. He says, you don't have any question? He says, no, it's all good. So he raises the question. He says, it should have said going down and then going up. Because angels in heaven first come down and then they go up, not go up. They're not on the ground. So he says in Yiddish, he says, that's a question? So what type of question is this? This was a dream. Who asks questions on dreams? You wake up and you start asking, in my dream, they should have gone up, they should have gone down. We all know how sensible and what type of rhythms of logic dreams use. Dreams are purely chaos. So the original said, don't ask me any questions. So in Yaakov's dream, the ladder reaches heaven. And then you have in Job and Eov, the flatterer whose head has reached the clouds, and you have the head here, the leprosy. And with this connection to these four roshos, a pattern emerges. There are three major reasons why people employ words as weapons. Even if it seems like a benign conversation, but a conversation that consists of what we would call lashon hara, gossip, slander, bad-mouthing, denigration, etc., humiliation, hate, this type of negative speech. Generally, there are three reasons. Of course, like whenever we use the word general, there are many details, many different manifestations, many different scenarios, and so forth. And the Torah describes it accurately in three terms. The three terms for the leprosy: se'es, sapachas, and baheret. What does the word se'es mean? The word se'es is related to the Hebrew word for uplifting, right? To carry something, right? Kisisa es rosh b'nei Yisrael is the same word. When you will lift up the head of the Jewish people. Kisisa. Here it's a leprosy. There it's to lift up the head of the Jewish people. When is the word kisisa used? Do you remember in what context? To do what? What does it mean? To count them. Why would you define counting, taking a sense of lifting up heads? What does that have to do with counting? Counting means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this case, actually, they contributed a coin and they counted the coins. Why would the Torah describe it? Hashem tells Moshe, Kisisa es rosh b'nei Yisrael. Rashi says, when you'll count them, why does he call it lifting up their heads? The answer is very profound. Whenever you make a census, there's a danger. What's the danger? The danger is you're just a number. The Germans tattooed numbers into the arm of prisoners. It wasn't only because they were so organized, which is true, but essentially from a human, you became a number. In prisons and other situations, often people will be humiliated. As a prisoner once told me, they want to make you feel. Rabbi once told me about his years in prison. He said, they want to make you feel, the first thing is that you lost your dignity. You're a number. You're just a number. Often senses can have that feeling. How many people have told me, I was in this school or in this community, I felt like a number. When they have to write how many kids are in the school, that's how much I count. My entire value consists of the fact that I just increased the numbers. So God tells Moshe, when you make a census, Kisisa rosh b'nei Yisrael. There's a census and there's a census. A census always has to be with one objective, to elevate the head of the Jewish people. To elevate the head of the Jewish people means to make everyone understand that you are one number, no more and no less, which means you constitute you have an indispensable role. There is something that you must contribute that nobody else can contribute, and there's something that somebody else must contribute that you can't contribute. And in that sense, everybody is one number, loy pachos, and v'lo yoser, not less and not more. Kisisa rosh b'nei Yisrael. Yaakov says about Reuven, yeser se'es. Se'es means weight, heaviness, which it's hard to lift up. Su'u es rosh, right? Lisa means to carry. Vayisu oisai banov, they carried him. When you carry something, you have to uplift it. So that's what sisa is. Se'es means to uplift. What would be the connection to leprosy? And this is really, it's really, again, one of the remarkable things about Torah study. The names of the malady capture their psychology. In other words, the Torah is not only speaking about the body of the malady, of the illness, of the leprosy, but also the soul behind them. This is where a person puts down another person in order to uplift himself or herself and underscore their own importance. I need to sometimes feel better about myself. I don't feel good about myself. I feel empty. I have a void. I don't like me. Maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously. If there's a juicy conversation, or even if there's no juicy conversation, somehow, when I speak negatively about somebody else, it makes me feel better. In reference to the other person, I'm elevated. Se'es. I'm looking to feel better. I want to pick myself up. I feel like in the dumps. I feel sluggish. I feel useless. I feel lazy. I feel like a shlamazel. I feel like a batlin, whatever it is. If I can bring out the negativity of the other, whether it's an individual, it's them, it's a tribe, it's a community, not me, and there's a contrast, somehow instinctively, people feel that they feel better. There's a story about two brothers who were playing with each other in the garden. One was older but shorter. One was younger and taller. So the older one, who was shorter, took his younger brother who was taller and placed him in a ditch. His father, who was a Rebbe, called in the brother and said, "Why did you put your brother in a ditch?" He said, "Because there's something unjust. I'm older and I'm shorter. He's younger and he's taller. By placing him in a ditch, I created equilibrium. I created justice. He's shorter. He's younger. He should be shorter." And his father, known as Rebbe Maharash of Shmuel, said, "The next time you want to feel taller, instead of placing your brother in a ditch, climb up on a mountain." But to climb up on a mountain is sometimes difficult. To put somebody in a ditch doesn't demand for me to go higher. I could just make you lower. If I put you in a ditch and you become lower, automatically I'm higher. What do I have to go and sweat to become higher? I'll put you lower, automatically I'm higher. Psychologically, some of us do this constantly. Instinctively, sometimes without realizing it. And that's why when you're having a hard day or an empty day, you have to be very careful at those moments, because we're vulnerable. Just like people who have different addictions, and when they're having an empty day or an exhausted day, they have to be very careful, because they could lose their temper fast. They can eat 3 times the amount they should be eating and binge uninhibitedly, or other things. When you're feeling good about yourself, usually you don't have to numb the pain because there's not so much pain. But whenever I have to numb, one of the things is to start speaking about people. And if I could put them down in some way, an individual or a collective group, se'es. In my own mind, I have just reached higher. I feel a little better about myself. But there's another component, and that's called sapachas. The word sapachas in Hebrew, no, yesh po Yisraeli, ma ze sapachat? Attach. An attachment, right? Ki gershuni hayoim milihistapeach benachal as Hashem. Sapachat is an adhesion, an addition, an attachment. In Yiddish, the word is anoch shleper. How do you say anoch shleper in English? You can't. It's only Yiddish. There's no noch schleppers in English. There's only noch schleppers in Yiddish. A what? A hanger-on. Okay. A tag-along. The slang is a wannabe, a sapachas. There are people who speak gossip because they want to be part of a social clique. We go out for coffee Tuesday mornings, right? Not we. You drink coffee here. You're here. L'chaim. People go out. A juicy conversation develops. You had a Friday night meal and you're a guest. And suddenly they're analyzing somebody. And let's face it, sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's juicy, sometimes it's informational in the name of educational. Sapachas. I don't have the spine to look at my friends, to look at people, some of whom I look up to, some of them maybe I'm even a little jealous of. Some of them I want to emulate. Some of them I wish I would have some of the things they had. And say, I really feel uncomfortable talking about this. Or just standing up and excusing myself and leaving. Sapachas is, people are part of a social clique. We're noch lepers. What the conversation around me is, I will sometimes join. I want to be part of a clique. I want to be part of a group. I want validation. I want acceptance. Again, consciously or unconsciously. Instinctively, even if not deliberation. That's sapachas. I'm not fully present before I say a word. I get caught into the mob mentality. I follow the herd. Everybody says it, I say it. Everybody's talking about it, I talk about it. I'm not ready to take a stand. I'm not a sapachas. I'm not a tag-along. I'm not a noch schlepper. This conversation is inappropriate. I will not be part of it. Even if I'm not going to be rude, I will not be part of it. These people are also trying to feel better about themselves, or to feel that they matter, or to feel, how often does it happen? A bris, a pidyon ben, a bar mitzvah, a sheva brachas, a wedding, a Shabbos table, a barbecue, a Yom Tov meal, stam a dinner. People sit around the table and suddenly the conversation goes down south. People are being analyzed, often negatively, or positively on the way to be analyzed negatively, and people just join along. This is called sapachas. I look at myself innocent. There was no great evil intent here. I got carried with the flow. When there's a flow of water and you get caught in to the current, and I'm part of it, that's sapachas. Superficial fun, juiciness, acceptance allows me to sell my integrity and my conscience. I was once telling a story, so somebody in the crowd says, Rabbi, without names, who was it? Without names, if you just tell me who it was, it's just going to add a whole other flavor to the story. I'll be able to put it in my filing cabinets. And then when I say the name, she. Of course, yeah. It goes into the right filing cabinet. I have my file on her mother, on her sister, on her baba, on her great aunt, on her children. Good. I feel safe and secure, either in a state of sa'es or a state of sapachas. Then there is a third component, and that's called baheret. What does baheret mean? Bahir. What's bahir? Clarity. What does this have to do with leprosy? Clarity. Clarity is, this refers to people who think they know everything. For me, the world is clear. I know exactly who you are. I know exactly what you're thinking. I know exactly why you did this. I know exactly what is happening inside of you. I know your motives. I know your experiences. I know what type of person you are. This is arrogance. I lack the humility to listen, to ask, to inquire, to communicate and be attentive, rather than shun and reach conclusions. And as a result of this apparent or delusional sense of baheret, I know it all. Bahir b'shchakim. It's a light day when the sun is out and everything is clear. I believe I have clarity about everybody and everything, and therefore I can judge. And therefore I could speak about this. Why? I did not stop to ask, to listen. That's the state of baheret. Why not pick up a phone, call the person? Why not pick up a phone? Person did something. You felt it was wrong. Suddenly, a week later, the person is speaking publicly about it. Why don't you give the person dignity, call them up, send them an email, send them an emissary? Right away, what person reaches conclusions? Where does this come from? This comes from the fact the person thinks he's a pseudo-God. He's a pseudo-deity. Maybe you're missing something. Maybe there's a finiteness in your brain. Maybe there's more to the story. Maybe people have different natures, different backgrounds, different experiences, different paradigms. Maybe they know certain things you don't know about. Maybe they're even making a mistake and it was completely unintentional. Maybe. But baheret means I have already reached conclusions and I go ahead with full confidence. This is a third major reason why people can speak evil talk about other people. What's the remedy to all of this? What's the remedy to all of this? The remedy to all of this is the Veroishos. Take the Tower of Babel. What were they trying to do? They wanted to build a tower. Here, Veroishoi Magia Bashamayim. The Migdal's head should reach the sky. What's Job's Roishai? What's Eov's Roishai? His head is reaching the clouds. What's Yaakov's Roishai? The ladder is on the ground and it's reaching heaven. These three Roishais are a commentary to this Roishai. Because the key soul, the key motive behind negative speech about others is, I'm trying to build a migdal. I'm trying to build a tower that reaches heaven, as in Parshas Noach. Or in Job, I believe already that my head has reached heaven. My head is in the clouds. I have reached heaven. I have the heavenly perspective. And therefore, I can gossip about you or about others, or I want to reach heaven. I'm trying to elevate myself. Se'es or baheret. We're trying to be accepted. We're trying to be validated. Sapachas. What's the remedy? Yaakov's dream. The next Veroishai. Sula mutzav arza Veroishai magia hashamayim. If I have a ladder that begins on the ground, but its head actually reaches heaven. What is this ladder? What does this ladder look like? What does it mean that I have such a ladder? It's a ladder that begins in a very low place. It begins on the ground. It doesn't begin mid-air. It's grounded. It's grounded in reality. But it's tall. And it reaches heaven. Sula mutzav arza v'roisha magia hashamayma. That's the classic description of Yaakov Avinu describing in his dream the potential of the human life, of the human person, of the human soul. When a person can appreciate the fact that even if I'm standing on the ground and a part of me is very, very earthy and earthly, we are all made up of eretz. A part of us is earthy and earthly. And sometimes lowly. Person may have many components in their life, in their emotions, that are filled with earth, sand, sometimes dust, gravel, rubble, debris, dust. But v'roishay magia hashamayma. I can appreciate the fact that the top of the ladder touches heaven. A person who's truly wholesome, people who are self-aware of the synthesis between earth and heaven in their life, and they work on themselves to scale that ladder from ground to heaven, you'll never find them gossiping. Not because they always agree with everybody. Not because they don't feel hurt or pain. Not because nobody ever said anything wrong to them, or nobody ever did something to them or their loved one that was hurtful. Not because they're naive or out for lunch. Not because they're holy saints who see nothing and hear nothing that is negative. And not because only they may be afraid of a punishment. But it's something much deeper than that. Because gossip never in history did or will solve any problem or heal any wound or make anybody feel better or change a situation or elevate the circumstances. It is, just like the symptoms it produces, a configuration of the soul. That's what it is. It doesn't help the soul, doesn't elevate the soul, doesn't make me a better person, doesn't solve my problem. It disconfigures me. It disconfigures me. It comes from a lack of intellectual honesty and, most importantly, a lack of wholesomeness. Momentarily, I'm building a tower that reaches heaven. I may think my head is in heaven in the clouds, as in Noach, as in Job. Momentarily, I feel higher, I feel better, I feel confident, I feel comfortable. It was fun, it was juicy. But just like in the Tower of Babel or in the Job stories, towers that are built on insecurity, towers that are built on internal fear, towers that are built on internal shame, towers that are built on arrogance, dishonesty, and a lack of humility, towers that are built on the need for social conformity based on lacking real substance, those towers can't last. It's a castle built of cards. It's like the castles you build on the beach. The water comes and they're destroyed. Ladders constructed based on the knowledge that you may be on the ground, but the top of your soul reaches heaven, that you're always connected to the top, that the human soul, even when it's all the way down on the earth, is a ladder, and it always connects you to the top, that God always loves you in your essence unconditionally, and nobody can ever take from you away your true dignity, purity, innate goodness, your mission and destiny in life given to you by your Creator. And under all circumstances, even if my ladder is etched in the ground, but it's a chelik Eloikami mal Yaakov chevel nachalosoi, the Torah says. Yaakov is like a rope, and you have a rope that's connected all the way from the top to the bottom, and you shake the rope down here. The ripple effect will be seen up there, and conversely. When a person understands that they're a ladder, and your value never depends on somebody else validating it, these ladders are eternal. These ladders are enduring. Then, when there's a telephone call, I'm not analyzing and speaking bad about people. Why? If there's something to correct it. Of course, that's not gossip. If I have to warn somebody of a serious danger or a serious abuse, that's not called gossip. If there's somebody I have an issue with, talk to them, confront them, deal with it in the proper way, but from a place of inner wholesomeness, from a ladder that's mutzav arza, v'roishoi magia hashamayma. This you see when the Torah describes the leprosy of clothes, nigei b'gadim. There's an expression, loy hafach hanega es einoi. The kohen comes and takes a look, and the leprosy has not changed its eye. Literally, it means, what do you mean didn't change its eye? It didn't change its look. The eye is a term for appearance. He looks at the leprosy in the clothes, which is another form of leprosy. It didn't change its eye, meaning it didn't change its appearance. Loi hafach hanega es eino. It didn't change its appearance. But earlier, the Torah uses a more common term, which is more accurate, it would seem. Loi hafach hanega es mar'iso. It didn't change its look. Here he uses es einoi, its eye. What is the meaning of this? The meaning of this, the Chidush HaHarim says, the Gemara says that one of the sins that was represented in leprosy is tzarus ayin. Tzarus ayin literally means a narrow eye. It's usually associated with stinginess. Somebody is very, very stingy, will not be generous, will not give the poor, will not give the destitute. I'm extremely stingy and tight. My eye is very narrow. But tzarus ayin also has a more comprehensive theme. And that is my ayin, literally, my eye is tsar, is very, very narrow. What does it mean, my eye is very narrow? What does it mean? Loi hafach hanega es einoi. The nega did not transform its eye, its ayin. It means its look. It didn't change. The look didn't change. But also it means the ayin. The eye hasn't been changed. The eye as in the eye. Eye as an eye. And the eye as an I-E-Y-E. My eye hasn't changed. My perspective has not changed. There are two words in Lashon Kodesh, in Hebrew. And the Sefer Yetzirah says they are associated with each other. To quote the Sefer Yetzirah, one of the earliest works of Kabbalah, Ein b'toiva l'mayla me'oineg, ve'ein b'ra'a l'mata minega. In goodness, there's nothing greater than oineg, which means pleasure, delight. Yeshaya speaks about Shabbos. He says, "V'karasa la Shabbos, oineg." Hama'aneg es ha-Shabbos. Oineg means ecstasy. Ahava b'tanugim in Shir Hashirim. Mana'am ma'yofis ahava b'tanugim. A delight of, a love of ecstasy, of tainug, of pleasure. Ein b'toivel l'may, nothing greater than oineg, says the Sefer Yetzirah. Then it says, "Ve'ein b'ra l'mata minega." There's nothing lower than leprosy. Oineg and nega are exactly the same letters. Ayin, nun, gimel. There's one difference. In oineg, the ayin is in the beginning. Ayin, nun, gimel. Nega, leprosy, the ayin is at the end. Nun, gimel, ayin. Which means oineg and nega are not just two separate things. It's really the same thing. It's just the ayin changed. Says the pasuk, Lo yhafach hanega es einoi. The nega has not changed its ayin. The ayin, instead of being in the beginning, which would be oineg, is at the end, which becomes nega. Why didn't it change its ayin to make it pleasure instead of leprosy? Because I haven't changed my eye. My ayin. Not the letter ayin, but the limb called the eye. My perspective, my vantage point. I have tsorus ayin. My ayin is very, very narrow. What's the difference between oineg and nega? There are two types of people. I'm going to describe them. Please raise your hand. If it describes you, I don't mean externally, I mean internally. I don't mean like this. I mean inside. Raise your hand to yourself. There are two types of people. There are people who live in a state of nega. Nega is, I feel diseased. I feel cursed. I feel like a leper, even if I'm not a physical leper, God forbid. I feel like a leper. What's the definition? What are the symptoms? What's the halacha? Bodod yeshev, lonely. I'm a victim of loneliness. I feel like nobody in the world ever understood me. Nobody in the world will ever understand me. I can't trust anybody. I can barely trust myself. And this is not the person's choice sometimes. Sometimes a person has endured so much in their life, they look at themselves and what do they see? Nega. I see a leper. In the ancient world, a leper was seen as the person who has to be quarantined, secluded from society. In halacha, the mitzvah is bodod yeshev mechutz lamachana meshava. There were no impurity where the person was dismissed from the community. They had to be alone. But what does this mean in psychological terms? A person looks at their life and they really feel like, I'm just a shmata, I'm a loser, I'm a leper, there's nothing to me. My life is just one series of failures and setbacks and stumbling blocks and abuse and pain and trauma and frustration and jealousy. That's one life. There's another person who looks at life and feels oineg, ecstasy, pleasure, delight. They sing life. They celebrate life. Reb Nachman of Breslov said, what's the difference? He says, if you're giving a speech and somebody starts speaking in the middle of your speaking, what do we call it in English? Interruption. But what if I'm singing a song and somebody starts singing in the middle of my song? What is it called? Harmony. So he said the objective of life is to stop speaking and start singing. People who speak, everybody's always interrupting them. Because if you open your mouth, you're automatically interrupting me. People who sing, everybody's harmonizing with them. So he says the purpose is to stop speaking and start singing. Look who's talking. But I would add that there are people who even when they sing, they speak. And there are people even when they speak, they sing. There's a life of neg, a life of oineg. Oineg is like a musical. Oineg doesn't mean there's no disappointments in life. But it means that the person's ladder is always linked to heaven. Even when I'm on the ground, I'm a grounded person, I'm not naive. And I'm feeling everything that's happening to me. I never take away my ladder and push it down. I know there's always a core of divinity that could never be taken away from me. My head, my top, reaches and touches the divine, and it's one connection. So therefore, even when I'm grounded, I can always tune in to a part that is invincible, that is confident, that is ready for pleasure. It's open for oineg. You have to be ready for oineg. We know that a person who's in a miserable place, a person could come over to you and share beautiful words of comfort, but I may completely not be open to hear it. Why am I not open to hear it? Because I'm in a state of nega. I don't have room for oineg. Can I be in a position to be able to look at my nega and quarantine it rather than quarantine me and open myself up to the roishoy magia hashamayma? I didn't change my ayin. My ayin remained at the end. My ayin remained at the end, and therefore what happens? It's a nega because sorus ayin. My eye is narrow. What's the difference between negas and oinegs? One difference. Negas kenenish faginen. How do we say that in English? It's very hard for them to enjoy other people's successes because what you have, you may be taking from me. People who are filled with delight are happy with other people's successes. Your light doesn't take away from my light. That's number one. Number two, people who are in a state of oineg don't need to be parasites and put down other people to feel good about themselves. Number three, people who are in a state of oineg are never tag-alongs and wannabes because they remain connected to themselves because there's a self that is valuable. Finally, people who are in a state of oineg never have to be arrogant to justify and legitimize their existence. Arrogance is a form of insecurity. People who are truly wholesome are also truly humble. The two always come together. Because if you're wholesome, you're in tune with infinity. And when you're in tune with infinity, you're always humble. It goes one step further. Says the Moirei Naim Reb Nachum Chernobyl says as follows. What's the greatest oineg, the greatest pleasure of the Ribbono Shel Olam? What's the greatest pleasure for God? What's his greatest oineg? So let's think about human parents. Yeah. What's one of the most pleasurable things a father or a mother can hear? And we know when somebody comes and they weren't summoned to do it, they weren't told to do it, they didn't feel obligated to do it, but somebody comes and gives you a call and says, you know, I saw your daughter and we were together in the same house for Shabbos, and I want to tell you how your daughter behaved. Or I was with your son, I want to tell you how your son behaved. And the person shares it with you, and the heart of a mother or a father swells with oineg, that's the word, with delight. That's the word. The word is delight. You may have not heard anything new that you didn't know. You probably knew it before. Maybe you even take the credit. In one form or another, a mother could certainly take credit in one way or another. But that's the word, oineg. Did you hear something? You may have known it. Yeah. A principal calls, a teacher calls, even more, a stranger calls. Not part of the report card, not part of the regular communication. And they share something beautiful about your child. The child that you raised with blood, sweat, tears, hopefully laughter, oineg, and love. And then you hear about their behavior, about their attitude, about something they did for somebody else perhaps, about a way they dealt with a situation, and your heart simply swells with oineg. What's one of the most impoverishing and depressing things a parent hears? The exact opposite. That call from the principal, that call from the teacher, whether they're on target or they're completely off target. The call from the stranger, and when you hear about the exact opposite, then you feel like nega. You feel like a leper. There's this feeling of loneliness, of pain, of anguish. Says the Helika Moirei Naim, the reason it's this way in this world is because a person is in God's image. The same is true with Hashem. What's the greatest pleasure that you could give God? when you share something nice about one of his children. Bonim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. Every Jew is a child. When I share something beautiful, positive, to the person or to another person, God's heart, kivayachol, swells up with pleasure. What happens? The opposite. When I speak about one of his children disparagingly, negatively, whether it's right or wrong, it's irrelevant. They can come and tell me about my son or my daughter, something that's accurate, but it's still a stab in the heart. You may have known it, but it's still a stab. So says the Moirei Nayim, listen to these words. He says, you took Hashem's oineg and you transformed it into nega. You took his potential for oineg. He wants to have that oineg, that relationship, that sense of delight and love, and you snatched it away from him, and you replaced it with a sense of nega, leprosy, so to speak, in God himself. And he says, since a person is in the image of God, that's what happens to the person also. Their oineg is transformed into nega. The ayin goes from the beginning to the end because it's all about the ayin perspective. A person who has a narrow perspective is arrogant, baheret. A person who has a narrow perspective needs to be uplifted a whole time. And if speaking about others can uplift me, so be it. Person who has a narrow perspective needs validation, needs to be a wannabe, a tag-along. So I just go with the flow, I go with the current. All the three reasons we discussed. A person who's sula mutzav arza, v'roishay magia shamayma. He's not the tower that wants to reach heaven. Se'es or sapachas. He's not the guy whose head is already in the clouds. He's sula mutzav arza, v'roishay magia shamayma. Then he lives in the world of oineg. When you live in a world of oineg, in a world of internal acceptance, internal wholesomeness, internal joy, ava b'tanugim, there's a state of oineg that characterizes you. You never leave that space. You never step out of that sacred space. You bring the world into that sacred space. So when there's a challenge, you confront it with oineg, with a sense of wholesomeness, with a sense that you want to fix, not break. You want to lift up, not denigrate. Don't understand this as a naive, purist perspective on the world when you're not dealing with real sharks and real nastiness and some really nasty things going on. No. I'm not as naive as I sound. We're talking about a person who's mutzav arza, everything. Eves alts. I see everything. But I have a broad eye, not a narrow eye. So I want to broaden it. I want to expand it. I want to build. I want to sublimate. I actually want to repair. It's a much faster way to fix things. Much faster. And then the person lives in an oineg which is aligned with God's oineg. That's why the Arizal, it's very interesting, the Arizal instituted that before a person davens in the morning, the Arizal had a takana institution that many do, that you say before davening, Hareini mekabel alayim mitzvahs aseshel v'haftal l'reacha kamoicha. I accept upon myself the mitzvah of loving every other Jew. What's the connection to davening? It's a beautiful thing, but what's the connection to davening? The answer is because there's nothing that brings parents joy and pleasure like the knowledge that the siblings get along. Especially as they get married and they build their own families. There's nothing as joyous and wholesome to parents when they know that their sons and daughters really get along with each other. And there's nothing as painful for parents when they watch siblings fighting with each other, not talking to each other. It tears them apart. Why? Because for parents, all siblings are one. Every mother looks at all the children. She doesn't see many children. She sees them all included within her. That's how parents look at children. They remember them when they were born. They were little cute angels before they became these terrorists. How could they not get along when they were 2 years old? They were running around the house, making a churban, putting ice cream on the leather couch, etc. How could they not get along with each other? Just because they think they're adults? So when we see our children from a different vision, and when they could bring that vision into adulthood and maintain the unity, It confirms everything that family is about, which is unity, caring, love. So before I go to daven to Hashem, I'm going to ask Hashem for what I need. Says the Arizal, the first thing, tell God that you get along with all your siblings. Tell God you get along with all your siblings. What happens then? You're living in a world of oineg, a world of delight. The Rebbeinu Shalom Kivayachal is now in a world of oineg, of pleasure. And whenever you're in a place of delight, blessings flow. Energy is expansive. So tefillos can be fulfilled, because what's tefillah? Tefillah, you want to open up a new channel. I can daven, but I have to open up channels. The channels are channels of ecstasy, channels of delight. You know, when you're in a happy mood, you think better, you work better, you're proactive, you do things much faster. Why? Because the energy is not plugged, it's not stopped. The ayin is not sar, it's not narrow. It's broad, it's expansive. Because it's expansive, so then everything changes. That's why the Arizal said that before davening, one should accept the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael. A wise man once said, gossip is the most deadly microbe. It has neither legs nor wings. It's composed entirely of tails, and most of them have stings. That's the alternative, that's the choice. Person chooses, do I put down people or do I inspire people? I'm either part of a solution or part of a problem. Hafach haneges einoi. Always about perspective, ayin. The circumstances of me and somebody else may be similar. One person looks at it from one place, from one ayin. Another person looks at it from another place. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos speaks about ayin toiva, ayin ra. A good eye, a bad eye. What does it mean, a good eye and a bad eye? It's not about circumstances. It's about the perspective of the circumstances. Every life has challenges. Till Mashiach comes, the world is filled with challenges. We live in exile. We live in a broken world. But the question is, my ayin. Is my eye rooted in oineg? That's ayin toiva. Is my eye rooted in nega? That's ayin ra. And when a person realizes how much God invested in them, then at every moment you can be an ambassador of love and of light and of hope. And then I don't gossip, not because I have nothing to say. I may have a lot of stories, but because there's nothing here. It's mamish, it's like, you want me, the Kotzker Rebbe once said, I don't want my Hasidim not to sin because they don't have a craving for sin. I don't want them not to sin for that reason. I want them not to sin because they shouldn't have time to sin. And I think what he meant was, I don't want they should amputate their natural emotions. Of course they have certain cravings, but they shouldn't have time to sin. Their lives should be so filled to the top, so occupied with meaning and goodness. Who has time to sin? As garnish best of a satan, you don't have anything better to do. There was once a rabbi, prominent person, it was a number of years ago, and he said something harshly, negatively about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And then he realized he was wrong, so he wrote a letter of apology. And he wrote that, I hope, as the Rebbe hat nicht gehabt kein Kpeda auf mir. I hope that the Rebbe didn't have a Kpeda, a grudge. It says when a tzaddik has a grudge, it can have negative concept. I hope he didn't have like a negative feeling towards me and a negative attitude towards me. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe told him, he said, Gleibt mir, ich hab nicht kein Zeit, haben a Kpeda auf nach Hayiden. Trust me, I don't have the time to be able to harbor a grudge against another Jew. When a person's life is filled, when a person's life is full, I may have broken parts in me, and there may be a part of me, I get off the phone call with somebody and I'm furious at what they said or what they did. Maybe a member of your child's school, a staff member of your child's school, or your company, or your boss, or your sister-in-law about the Sheva brachas that she was supposed to make, and now you have to make it, and it's 2 hours before Shabbos, whatever. And you hang up the call, and you now want to call another 8 people. We have that. At that moment, you have to look at your ladder. before you make a call. You may have to make calls because you have to deal with stuff. Maybe you have to call somebody. Maybe you have to talk to somebody. Maybe you need help. Maybe you need therapy. Maybe you need to let out stuff. Whatever the situation is, but make sure your sulam is mutzav arza. You have a ladder on the ground, but the top is touching heaven. When you could feel that there's a part of you that touches heaven, that heaven is embracing you, now you can have a conversation because it's going to come from a place of oineg, not nega. In every person's life, when you're rooted in the world of infinite delight, of a ladder down here, up there, you can always choose to take your ayin and transform it from nega to oineg. Have a wonderful week.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.